Hi, I'm Tom Alston. I'm the CEO and president, and sometimes I even take out the trash, of Aero Marine Tax Professionals. Our main purpose in life is to help you legally avoid the transactions tax. Mostly you will refer to it as a sales tax, but in California, the way that we work it, we're helping you legally avoid the use tax. We do not mitigate your taxes. We completely eliminate them. We've done a little over 1,400 cases, and we have never failed one. The primary test period that we use for aircraft purchases is an item or an exemption called the Interstate Commerce Flight Hours tests. Okay? All of the things that I've ever told you about residency and the principal use tests that we've talked about in previous videos, the residency has no effect on this test. This entire test is never based on the location of the aircraft, with the exception of 2 moments in time during the qualifying steps. Okay? It's only about flight hours. Good news, huh? You literally can use this test period if provided that you enter it correctly, and I'm overdoing this because it's really important, because the qualifying steps you have to understand, but after that it never matters where the geographical location of the aircraft sitting on the ground. Okay? The Interstate Commerce Test has 3 qualifying steps. They must be done in the order I'm going to give them to you, and I'm going to use cities so that we can talk about it, so we've got some kind of a reference. Okay? None of the flight hours involved with the qualifying steps are part of the test period. What this means is, well, I'll explain it to you as we go through it. The first step is you must take possession of the aircraft while it's physically located outside the state of California. This does not mean that you cannot buy an aircraft that is currently sitting inside the state of California. It just means, as a condition of the purchase agreement, you have to require that the seller deliver it to you outside the state of California. A little deeper dive into that means that if the airplane is sitting inside of California, you nor anyone who works with you or is associated with you can ride on that airplane from inside the state of California to the out-of-state possession point. Part of the process is you have to support that the people who work for you, whoever went to take possession of that airplane, they have to prove that they got there by not riding. You have to support that they got there by not riding on that airplane from inside California to an outside of California location. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to say that you took possession of you had the aircraft delivered to you in Medford, Oregon. Step 1, out-of-state possession. Step 2 would be known as the first functional use. There's a requirement called you must make a first functional use flight prior to entering California. So we like to require the beginning of that flight and the end of that flight to occur outside the state of California. So for business purposes, let's say that you have a reason to go to Reno, Nevada, okay, or Boise, Idaho. I'm always going to try to make that first functional use flight for you as short as possible, because it's not part of the test period. It's part of the qualifying steps. This will become more apparent to you later why. So if you have a business reason to go to Boise, you leave Oregon, that first functional use flight, which the definition of first functional use is an interstate flight with a passenger on board in some cases, and the destination that you fly to, you have third-party documentation that supports you went there for a business reason. So you fly to Boise, and again, depending upon what kind of aircraft you have, which we'll discuss in the initial debrief of what you're getting ready to do, there has to be a passenger in certain cases on that flight. As long as you can support that you went to Boise for a business reason, so you left Oregon, went to another state, Idaho, for business. And we'll show you how to do this business support documentation based on your exact fact pattern. So first step, out-of-state possession. Second step, you must complete your first functional use flight. The third step is enter into California. Now, remembering that I've talked a couple of times about the hours don't count. So think of it the first time you land in California. Let's say that you land at Oakland, okay? The first time you land in California, make absolutely certain that you land at an airport that sells fuel, okay? Because you need to buy fuel at that location. That fuel ticket has a date, a location, and a tail number on it. That date starts a 6-month test period, okay? The best way I tell you to do this, to remember that, is when you first land in California, treat it like the trip meter on your car where you push the button and it resets to 0. Only the flight hours after that are part of the test period, because the test period does not start until you've entered California. And you can't use that starting point if you don't do step 1 and step 2 properly. Okay, that's how important. This is critical. You have to do these 3 steps in that order. Okay, so then I'll ask you for an assessment of how many hours you'll fly. And for the purposes of this video, let's say 100, so I can do the math simply. If, in fact, during that 6 months you fly for 100 hours, the law says more than half of those, which would be 51, and when you hire us, because you will hire us, we're going to raise the bar to 60%, because that margin of error helps you to protect you from yourself, because you're going to try to bring it in as close as possible. So we by contract will require that you do 60%. Okay, so that is how the interstate commerce test works. Now, I don't expect you to be an expert in it, but let me now explain to you definition of commercial, because this is the commercial interstate flight hours test. Any business purpose. Doesn't mean that you're transporting passengers or property for hire. If you're a private business owner and you're flying under Part 91 for your business, that's commercial. That meets the definition of commercial. Definition of intrastate versus interstate. Now, I think probably 99% of you know this, but I'm going to bring it up. Interstate means it starts in one state and ends in a different state or different country for the purpose of this test period. Intrastate means it starts in one state and ends in the state. So if you flew from Reno to Las Vegas, that is an intrastate flight. Any interstate flight which commences in one state and ends in another, and we have business support for the city that you land at, is on the good side of the test. Any business flight that starts in one state and ends in the same state, which is an intrastate, is on the bad side of the test. But that's not the only 2 types of tests. Can anybody guess what the other one is? You got it. Anytime let's say you flew from Oakland to Aspen to go skiing. That's an interstate flight, but it's not a business flight. So that also is on the bad side of the test. It's not a matter of just calculating all of your interstate flight hours. It's commercial interstate flight hours which qualify. Another of the typical questions is, the flight hours for this test period are not calculated by airspace, okay? Let's typically, if you flew from San Diego and went to Medford, Oregon, and let's say that the airplane that you were flying took 3 hours to get there, in the older test periods that we used, you had to calculate your flight hours by airspace. So you'd have spent 2 hours and 45 minutes over California and 15 minutes over Oregon. Using the commercial interstate flight hours test, airspace doesn't matter. You get credit for the whole 3-hour flight as long as you take off in the San Diego area, make no stops in the middle, and the first time you land is in Medford, Oregon. You get credit for all of that trip. And you get credit for the whole round trip if you're supporting the fact that you went to Medford for a business reason. For the purposes of this test period, you get credit for when you take off, to when you land, to when you return home. The basic difference between the principal use test, which I talked about in a previous video, and the interstate commerce test is the principal use test, which requires no business documentation. Okay? The location of the aircraft is everything on that test period. You must demonstrate that geographical location on a 24-hour basis. When you use the interstate commerce test, it's only based on flight hours. So you literally could have let's say that you're keeping your airplane at Van Nuys and your business's location is right down the street, okay? You literally could have the airplane next to your home airport every night and still pass this test. How? Well, I'm going to give you an absurd hypothetical to make the point. Let's say you got up every morning and your main office is in Southern California, and you flew to Las Vegas because you have another office or you have a business reason to go to Las Vegas, and you returned. And you did that every day of the test. Every night of the test period, it's sitting inside of California, okay? But you can still pass the test period, the commercial interstate test period, because it's only based on flight hours. In addition, there's no minimum amount of hours called out in the regulation. You just have to pass the laugh test. I mean, you don't buy a $50 million airplane and fly it between Chino and Orange County. The principal use test is primarily based on location and storage. The interstate commerce test is based on just flight hours and your ability to support those out-of-state locations as business tests. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to help you with that. We're going to make sure that you know how to document the stuff. We all know that airplanes spend most of their life sitting on the ground. So the interstate commerce test is like having your cake and being able to eat it too. It really is, because it's only based on how much you actually, the flight hours that you actually put on the aircraft. It's not as, it has no relationship to geography in terms of you having to prove that it never entered California, like the principal use test. The advantage of the principal use test is you don't have to provide business documentation. You don't have to support why you're flying.